Hi everyone. This is the last cardiovascular video. You guys are going to be quizzed over this this week in lab, so I thought it would be good to get it up there. Your test 3 grades are up, so you can look at them. I think I can make it so that you can see the right answers, but I'm not sure how to do that yet. And then later this week, by Thursday, you will have a video up for urinary system. I don't ever do respiratory system or digestive system in lecture. And although with COVID-19, it would be a nice time to do respiratory system, I don't want to add anything else to your responsibilities. Okay, so I thought you might think this picture was cool. Ooh, sorry, I forgot to pull up something. That is a angiogram of the blood supply primarily to the brain. I don't know if you can tell, but aortic arch, right? This is the Brachiocephalic artery going to the right common carotid, folding in and going to the internal carotid artery. This guy right here coming off of the subclavian and going back to the backside. That is the right vertebral, and then you can see all the left ones coming directly off of the aorta, the common carotid, branching into the internal carotid. The external carotid's going this direction, and then this guy tucking behind right there is the vertebral artery. So I think that one's really cool. Okay, so we got to this point right here. So we did the blood supply to and from the head. Oh, sorry, lost myself. We did blood supply to and from the head. And now we are going to pick up the next thing that gets systemic arterial blood supply, and that is the arms. So let's start talking about that. So the arterial supply to the upper limbs. So basically, regardless of how you get to the subclavian, and of course, remember, if you're going to the right subclavian, you have to do brachiocephalic artery or brachiocephalic trunk first. Move this over just a little bit. So brachiocephalic artery or brachiocephalic trunk. But if you're going to the left side, you go directly off of the aortic arch. So here's the subclavian. After we're in the subclavian, the blood flow left and right side is the same. So now that we're in the subclavian, then what do we branch off of there? So let's follow that. So after we're in the subclavian artery, and it's called subclavian again because it goes under the clavicle. And then once you get into the armpit region, it's called the axillary artery. So axillary, oops, no, that's not what I want. I want an arrow. I want axillary artery there. Now, if you were studying this in advanced anatomy, you would know it's only called axillary after certain things branch off, but we don't need to do it in that much detail. So let's call it axillary if it's in the armpit region, okay? And then as you move down into the arm region, it's going to be called the brachial artery. There are some small ones, you don't have to know those. And you're going to call it brachial until it splits. It usually splits about the elbow level, but there is a tremendous amount of variation. When it splits, lateral side, elbow side is going to be, thumb side is going to be the radial artery, and medial side is going to be the ulnar artery. And the radial and the ulnar are going to form an anastomosis, 2 anastomoses actually. They're kind of hard to see on a figure, so I don't usually ask them off of a diagram, but basically you've got 2 of these arches. Well, you've got one that's on the anterior side, it's called the superficial palmar arch. You've got one that's on the posterior side, it's called the deep palmar arch. And then those will give rise to the digital arteries, and the digital arteries deliver arterial blood supply to your fingers, okay? So pretty easy, right? The arterial flow goes subclavian, axillary, brachial, radial, ulnar, superficial, and deep palmar arches to the digital arteries. Okay, so that blood supply is going that direction. Then if we are going venous drainage back, there are more veins than there are arteries. So and also there are superficial veins. Hopefully you guys can figure out why there are very few superficial arteries, not a very safe place for an artery to sort of stabilize and evolve. So there are more superficial veins, lower pressure, not delivering blood to capillary beds, than there are superficial arteries. And in this figure, the superficial veins are the lighter color and the deep veins are the darker color. It's not actually what it looks like, but they're just trying to help you sort of look at the difference between them. So as you are delivering blood back, let's say we got it all the way to the fingers and then we're going back, you could either do superficial drainage or deep drainage. If we were doing superficial drainage, the digital veins drain into two different arches. I realize this is difficult to see, so I'm always really careful about how I ask this. So the superficial drainage is the dorsal venous arch. It's on the back side of your hand, and you may have big veins on the back side of your hand. That's the superficial drainage. So some of the digital veins drain into that superficial drainage, which is called the dorsal venous arch on the dorsal side of the hand. And then if I'm still following superficial drainage up, I'm going to see basically that I go into the basilic vein and the cephalic vein. So the basilic is on the medial side. I always remember basilic boob side. Blood is flowing up through the basilic vein on the medial side, and it's superficial. It's on the medial surface of the arm. There is an anastomosis or two between the basilic and the cephalic vein. So the basilic goes all the way up and generally dumps close to the axillary. It can dump into the brachial if it wants to. And then the cephalic, usually there's an anastomosis right here called the median cubital vein. If there's only one, if there's two, then it is the median basilic on this side and the median cephalic. So you either have one or two. I'll just show you what that looks like. I probably won't test you over it, but I just want to show you. So if instead of just this one, we had two right here, then this guy right here would be the median cephalic, and this would be the median basilic vein. But I'm going to test you over the figure in the book, so you don't have to worry about it. Although on cadavers, you can see quite a bit of variation. There's lots and lots of venous variation. So this anastomosis is called the median cubital vein. It's right there running over your elbow, the anterior surface of your elbow. Really common site of blood draws, so it ends up being clinically important. Okay, so then we've got the cephalic that's going all the way up and the basilic that's going all the way up. And those dump wherever the heck they want to. But generally speaking, the brachial, the basilic and the cephalic will have gathered together before you dump into the subclavian vein. But FYI, it can dump here, that one can dump there, that one can dump there. There's lots of venous variation. So don't worry too much about where it dumps. But once it's still called basilic as it's going up the medial surface and superficial. It's still called cephalic as it's going up the lateral surface and superficial. And then this one right here that's running up and dumping into the axillary, that's deeper, that one's going to be the brachial. So both the basilic and the cephalic usually dump into the brachial vein or the axillary vein. But it's okay. Just look at where it's going instead of just where it's dumping, and you'll be able to figure out which one it is. Okay, so that is the superficial drainage. So they're generally going to come together at least before the subclavian vein. So now the deep drainage. If you're looking at the deep drainage is generally in your textbook going to be in this darker color. So again, from the digitals, we're going to go up and we're going to dump into another arch. Generally speaking, these are called the Palmar Arches, and there's two of them. There's a superficial and a deep. You can't really see the difference very well on a figure, so I'm not really likely to ask you that one on a figure. So superficial and deep palmar arches. And then if you follow those up, you'll see generally a pair of deep veins that are on the medial side, these dark ones. Those are going to be the ulnar veins. And a pair of deep veins that are on the lateral side. Those dark ones are going to be the radial veins. Okay? So the radial and ulnar veins. When they change names is usually when they pass the elbow. Then they're usually 1, 2 brachial veins, although again, veins are really variable. There still could be 2 and 2 for a little while. Sometimes there's 1 and 2. But regardless, once you're in the arm region, these are called the brachial veins. Okay? And by the way, that one would be 1 brachial vein that it actually went into. So regardless of how many, if they are deep and they're running over the arm, they're brachial veins. And then the brachial veins are going to gather together with all of these guys. As it runs through the armpit, it's going to be called axillary. And then as it goes under the clavicle, it's going to be called subclavian. Okay, the subclavian, once you join with the internal and the external jugular veins, then it's going to be the brachiocephalic vein. So let me show you that. Okay, so let's look here and make sure, oops. Okay, so I gathered everything up, okay, and then I went under the clavicle. As I go under the clavicle, I am a subclavian vein. But then after I gather everything, so listen to this because this is important. After I gather everything from the arm and from the outside of the head and the inside of the head, so the external jugular vein and the internal jugular vein, then I am the brachiocephalic vein because I gathered everything from the brachio and everything from the cephalic. And unlike arteries, you have 2 brachiocephalic veins. They're not necessarily the same length because the superior and inferior vena cavae are more toward the right side. So we're doing the right subclavian, the right external jugular vein, the right internal jugular vein. I may have said the wrong thing a minute ago. Sorry about that, but I can't remember what I said. Then they become the brachiocephalic vein. If I'm on the left side, again, subclavian, gathering everything from the arm, external jugular vein, internal jugular vein. When those come together, they are the subclavian vein. The 2 subclavian veins, when those join, they become the superior vena cava. Okay, that's how you form the superior vena cava, is with the 2 brachiocephalic veins. Okay, all right. I may have screwed that one up. I can't quite tell. I'm a little asleep this morning. Okay, so now we are going to do, so basically what we did is we did arterial supply and venous drainage from everything that came from the ascending aorta and the aortic arch. So the ascending aorta only gives blood supply to the heart, okay? And then the aortic arch gives blood supply to the head and to the arms. And so now we are going to move down and give blood supply to the thorax. And I don't make you learn a whole lot of the detail that goes on in the thorax just because it's kind of hard to see in figures. But basically now we're in the descending aorta, specifically in the descending thoracic aorta, which you're seeing right here. And so the blood supply going through the descending thoracic aorta is going to give rise to arterial blood supply to most of the rest of the stuff in the thorax. But we already gave blood supply to the lungs via pulmonary circulation, and we already gave blood supply to the heart via the left and right coronary arteries, so there isn't that much left to give blood supply to in here. So the descending thoracic aorta gives rise to blood supply to these intercostal arteries, which supply the intercostal muscles. And then two that aren't shown, but I just kind of want you to understand conceptually that these things run through the thorax and they would need systemic arterial blood. So not shown in the picture, so don't worry about having to identify it from the picture, is a branch off of the descending thoracic aorta called the esophageal artery. And it supplies the esophagus, and hopefully that makes sense that you would actually need systemic arterial flow to the esophagus. And then arteries called the bronchial arteries, and the bronchial arteries supply the bronchi because those are parts of the pulmonary system, the respiratory system, that don't do gas exchange with the external environment like the alveoli do. So they actually need systemic blood supply. So just to the bronchi, not all the way down into the deeper portions of the lungs. So neither of those are shown on that picture. Okay, so now we have to get blood supply back from the thorax, back into the venous circulation. So let me show you that. And this is a weird circulation pattern. And the weird circulation pattern is because the superior and inferior vena cava are more toward the right side. Remember, the aorta was more toward the left side, so when you were going from the aorta on the left side, you didn't have to make as many diversions. But same thing with venous drainage on the right side. On the right side, you can kind of go directly into venous circulation, but from the left side, you need to make a couple of jogs. So the venous drainage of the thoracic cavity, that's what we're going to talk about right now. Okay, so basically what we have is we have to get everything into the superior vena cava, okay? All of this stuff we're going to get into the superior vena cava. But from the right side, we can do it more directly than we can from the left side. So let's do the right side first. Okay, so the right side is right here. All of these intercostal veins, and there's several different kinds of intercostal veins, they are all going to drain directly into this vessel right here. This vessel is called the azygos, and the azygos is carrying blood that direction. Okay, the azygos is going to bring blood up into the superior vena cava. Azygos as in azygote, as in not paired. So all of these vessels don't have pairs. So all of these right side intercostal veins are going to dump into the azygos, which dumps into the superior vena cava. And then the superior vena cava is, of course, carrying blood that direction, right? So it's going to go up and over. Now, what about the left side? The left side is a little more difficult because the left side is not actually close to the superior vena cava. So what are we going to do with the left side? What we're going to do with the left side is all of these intercostal veins, all of them, are going to be carrying blood that direction, okay? But the top ones dump into a different place than the bottom ones do. So the intercostal veins will drain the left side of the thoracic wall, and they're going to drain into two different vessels. This guy right here is called the accessory hemiazygos vein, right there, this guy, okay? And the accessory hemiazygos vein is going to drain into the azygos. So watch the direction this one's going to go. All of that stuff is going to go down into there, and then there, and then I'm going to go up into the azygos. So intercostals, accessory hemiazygos, azygos, okay? Or the lower ones will actually drain right here, the intercostals into the hemiazygos, and the hemiazygos goes right there, and then it dumps. You can't kind of see it because it's tucking back behind here. It's going to dump into the azygos. So one more time. If I am doing the right side, all I do is dump all of these intercostals directly into the azygos, and that goes into the superior vena cava. But if I'm doing the left side, I do intercostals to accessory hemiazygos to azygos to superior vena cava, or if I'm doing the lower ones, I do intercostals to hemiazygos to azygos to superior vena cava. Okay, everybody hates that one. If I were you, when I was studying this, I would draw numbers and arrows to figure out when things were actually going to happen. You can totally do this. It's not hard. Okay, so now what we are going to do next is arterial flow through the abdomen. So let's look at arterial flow through the abdomen. All right, so now, of course, what we are going to do is we're still in the descending aorta, but now we're in the descending abdominal aorta. And the descending abdominal aorta has some small branches and some big branches. So how about we take care of the easy branches first, just to make sure that you've got them, and then we'll go back and pick up the hard branches. So as far as order goes, the first branch, this one's not the easy one, I'll come back to it in just a second. The first branch that's immediately under the diaphragm is the celiac trunk or the celiac artery. That one will take some practice, so we'll get to it in just a second. And then these small branches right here that are going to the adrenal or suprarenal glands, these guys right here are the suprarenal arteries, suprarenal arteries. These big honkers right here that almost nobody should be able to miss are the left and right renal arteries that go directly to the kidneys. Okay, we'll pick that one up in just a second and that one up in just a second. These are the left and right gonadal arteries, but they're not called gonadal if you know the sex of the person. They are called ovarian arteries in a female, and they are called testicular arteries in a male. Okay, left and right gonadals. Okay, and then this branch right here is going to be the inferior mesenteric artery. So the easy ones, I think, that don't have a whole heck of a lot of branches are the suprarenals, the renals, the gonadals, right? And then the other ones we're going to study in a little bit more detail. Okay, so let's look at the celiac trunk, which people have a hell of a lot of trouble with. So the first branch off of the abdominal aorta is the celiac trunk. Let's go and look at that one. Okay, so it's this top figure that you're seeing right here. Let me make it a little bigger. Come on. Does not want to let me make it bigger. Okay. All right, so let's look at our celiac trunk. There is some variation in this among people, but we'll show you what the most common pattern is. So the celiac trunk is right here below the diaphragm, and it's going to give rise to this guy right here. Let me show you the direction the blood flows through these guys. So this guy right here, the blood is going that direction. It's going to give rise to this guy right here. Blood is going that direction. And this guy right here, okay? So we should be able to label all of those by sort of where they're going. All right, so the celiac trunk gives rise to the splenic artery, which supplies the spleen. It gives rise to the left gastric artery, which goes along the lesser curvature of the stomach from the left side. And then it gives rise to the common hepatic artery, which is going to branch again. It's going to serve the liver, but it's also going to serve some other things. So let's look at that one. All right, so this guy right here is going to the spleen. It usually wiggles like that, strangely. It goes behind the stomach and then to the spleen. That one is going to be called the splenic artery, okay? That guy right there. And then this guy right here is wrapping around the lesser curvature of the stomach, right, from the left side, okay? That is the left gastric artery. And then this guy right here that is going toward the liver and other stuff is called the common hepatic artery. It's common because it is going to branch. All common everythings will branch, okay? So the common hepatic artery. So check with the left gastric, got that one. We got the splenic, and then we're going to do the common hepatic. The common hepatic is going to branch further. So let's find the branches of the common hepatic. The branches of the common hepatic are going to be the right gastric, the gastroduodenal, and the hepatic artery proper, or sometimes called the proper hepatic artery. So let's find those branches. Ready? Okay, so this guy right here, do you see him? This guy right here is carrying blood this direction, okay? And it is carrying blood to the lesser curvature of the stomach from the right side. It's called the right gastric artery. It forms an anastomosis with the left gastric artery. Cool? Okay. This guy right here, do you see it's tucking behind the stomach? It's delivering blood supply to the greater curvature of the stomach and also to the duodenum, which is the first portion of the small intestine. So blood is going that direction. So this one, because of where it's delivering blood, is called the gastroduodenal artery. Gastroduodenal artery, delivering blood to the stomach and to the first part of the small intestine, gastroduodenal. And then this guy right here, which is delivering blood directly to the liver, that guy right there, is called the hepatic artery proper, or sometimes the proper hepatic, and it will split into the left and the right. Okay, the left and the right hepatic artery. Cool? Okay, so one more time through this. Ready? Okay, so celiac trunk right here will give rise to 3 big branches. This guy right here is the left gastric. This guy right here is the splenic. And this guy right here is the common hepatic artery. The common hepatic artery will then split into 3 big branches. This branch right here is the right gastric artery. This branch right here is the gastroduodenal artery. And this branch right here is the hepatic artery proper, which splits into the left and right hepatic arteries. Okay, so then let's get blood supply to the rest of the guts. Okay, and the rest of the guts come from here. So now, all right, so let's show you what you're looking at here. Okay, so what this picture did is cut off the stomach, the spleen, the liver, all of that stuff that would have been supplied by the celiac trunk, so that you could see the rest of what was supplied in the guts. And primarily you're looking at 2 big branches right here. This big honkin' branch right here is the superior mesenteric artery. The superior mesenteric artery, because it runs through the superior portion of the mesentery to supply most of the intestines. Okay, so mesentery, remember, was when you had 2 layers of serous membrane with stuff between them. Part of the stuff is the vessels that are actually supplying the guts. So that's the superior mesenteric artery right there. It splits into a whole bunch of little intestinal arteries that you don't have to learn. And then this guy right here that supplies the rest of the guts, the rest of the intestines, is the inferior mesenteric artery. But I want you to see sort of what they supply before we go any further. So the superior mesenteric artery is going to supply the entire rest of the small intestine, except for that little bitty portion that we got with the gastroduodenal artery, okay? And then it's going to supply the proximal portions of the large intestine, or the colon. It's the other name for the large intestine. So all of this that's cut off right here was the supply to the rest of the small intestine. And then look at what it supplies. So here's the last part of the small intestine. So look at what it supplies after that. What it supplies after that is blood supply to the ascending colon and the transverse colon, right? Those are the 2 proximal portions of the large intestine, is the ascending and transverse colon. All right, so superior mesenteric artery, small intestine, almost all of it, ascending and transverse colon. And then the inferior mesenteric artery is the only thing that we haven't done as far as gut supply. And that's this guy right here. Look at what it is supplying. The inferior mesenteric artery is supplying the descending colon and the sigmoid colon. Do you see that? And there's a little bit of overlap between what they supply. Okay, so that's going to be important that you understand. The superior mesenteric artery, almost the whole small intestine, proximal portion, superior and transverse colon of the large intestine. And then the inferior mesenteric is the descending and sigmoid colon of the large intestine. Okay, so we have gotten pretty much everything in the abdominopelvic cavity, almost everything. Maybe not the pelvic cavity. We'll pick up the pelvic cavity in just a second. So now I want to look at the venous drainage of the abdomen. The venous drainage of the abdomen is weird, and hopefully you guys have figured out why. I love this. So you will probably have to write about it for your 4th exam. It may be a take-home portion, but I do love hepatic portal circulation, and I've got a video. Forgot to bring it up for you. Let me bring it up for you. Got a video I'm going to show you with hepatic portal drainage. My dog. Okay. Hepatic portal system. We'll bring that up so it'll be ready. Come on. Okay. I'll show you that in just a second. So let's do the easy portions. Dogs. Okay. The easy portions of... Do you want to say hi, Soups? Say hi. Superfly. Come here, Soups. Come here. Turn around. Turn around. Soups, say hi. Hi. Maddie. This is Superfly and Maddie. They are not supposed to be in here, but here they are. Things happen. Okay, move your little feet so I don't squish them. Move, move. Thank you. Okay. All right. Back to work, Melanie. Okay. So let's do the easy portions of venous drainage of the abdominal pelvic cavity first. And the easy portions are the portions that don't use hepatic portal circulation. So this guy right here, these are of course renal veins, right? Okay, blood is going back that direction through renal veins. So back that direction, okay? What else is easy portions? Relatively easy are the gonadals, okay? The right gonadal usually dumps directly into the inferior vena cava. The left gonadal right here usually dumps into the left renal. There is variation in that, and it's not particularly meaningful that it does that. So we've got the gonadals and the renals, okay? Those dump directly into the inferior vena cava. And then we have the hepatic portal system. And the hepatic portal system, it's important that you understand why the hepatic portal system exists. And then I'll sort of show you the big picture of what it does. So we've got the suprarenals, the renals, and the gonadals. Oh, I forgot to show you the suprarenals. Let me show you the suprarenals too. The suprarenal veins. These guys right here, suprarenal veins either dump directly into the inferior vena cava or into the renals. And I never ask you this particular portion, whether it dumps into the renals, simply because it's not particularly meaningful. It's just like a little evolutionary anomaly. But it is important that they don't use the hepatic portal circulation. So now let's look at hepatic portal circulation. So the deal with hepatic portal circulation is that it kind of breaks the rules of venous drainage, because generally what circulation does is you go, let's think systemic circulation, although it's true for pulmonary too. With systemic circulation, you go heart, arteries, arterioles, right? Capillaries, venules, veins, heart, okay? But a portal system puts two capillary beds in series, so it breaks the rules. It goes heart, arteries, arterioles, capillary bed, portal vessel, second capillary bed, and then venules, veins, heart. It puts two capillary beds in series so that everything that was gathered from the first capillary bed is forced through the second capillary bed before it goes back into circulation. That's the big picture with the hepatic portal system. And with the hepatic portal system, what actually happens is everything that was absorbed from the digestive tract is forced through the liver before it goes back into circulation. Now, why? Why would you want everything that goes through the digestive tract, all of that blood that was absorbed, why would you want to force it through the liver? Well, it's because the liver cleanses the blood, and the food that you eat is not sterile. It has pathogens and toxins in it. And do you want to dump it back into the inferior vena cava, or do you want to cleanse it first? The liver has all these hepatic, the sinusoids, those big, wide vessels that make the blood go through really, really slowly. And it also has these big macrophages that are looking at the blood as it goes by to see if anything is funky. And so, hopefully, if you ate spinach that had E. coli on it, poop spinach, you actually don't get infectious agents into your bloodstream because you whoop up on them as they go through the liver before they go into the bloodstream. So the whole picture, the whole big picture of hepatic portal circulation is to take everything from the digestive tract and force it to go slowly through the liver so that it can be cleansed before you dump it back into circulation. And then I'll tell you what the spleen has to do with the story as well. So with hepatic portal system, basically what we are going to do is we're going to send everything through the liver first, but we have to go back and acknowledge one weird thing. And the one weird thing that I want you to acknowledge is that this means that the liver actually gets two different kinds of blood. The liver gets high oxygen systemic arterial blood through the proper hepatic artery, right? Okay. So it's getting that blood into the liver's capillary beds, but then the liver also gets venous blood, right, through the hepatic portal circulation. So it was gathering, it's not in this picture, but I just want you to understand that the liver is getting two different kinds of blood. It needs systemic arterial blood because it needs high levels of oxygen. It's got work to do. But then its work is in part cleansing the blood that comes through the hepatic portal circulation. So let's look at what's actually going to happen here. All right, so, and I love hepatic portal circulation. Okay, so do you see this chair? Let me draw you a bad picture of the chair real quick. Do you see the chair? Change the color. Can't change color. So 1, 2, 3. Do you see that chair? Okay, so the chair, what we have to do is get some directionality. These are the major vessels. There's more vessels in hepatic portal circulation, but the big ones that you are going to have to know are the front leg of the chair, the back leg of the chair, the seat of the chair, and then the back of the chair. So let's kind of do them in order. So let's do this one first. Let's go back to our arrow and say, okay, so this guy right here that we're seeing in purple, this guy is gathering blood, and you don't have to memorize it if you think about it. It's gathering venous blood from the proximal portions of the large intestine, and although it's not shown, almost the entire small intestine. This one is called the superior mesenteric vein. That's the back leg of the chair, the superior mesenteric vein. And then this guy right here, do you see? It's gathering blood from the descending and sigmoid colon right there. That guy right there is the, oh, did I say superior mesenteric? Oh, yeah. This is the inferior mesenteric vein. Okay. And then this guy right here is coming from the spleen. Do you see that one? That's the splenic vein. So the front leg is the inferior mesenteric vein. The back leg is the superior mesenteric vein. The seat of the chair is the splenic vein. Okay. And then gathering them all together, all one big, it's a huge vessel. When you look at the cadavers, it actually looks really wide like a piece of tape, and it's completely flat because it's super low pressure like a vein. This guy right here is the hepatic portal vein, and the hepatic portal vein is gathering blood from all of these locations. And the hepatic portal vein is going to do what veins don't generally do. It's going to be delivering blood to a capillary bed. What's going to happen is the blood that goes through that capillary bed, it's going to mix the blood that was coming in the hepatic portal vein, which is low oxygen, potentially high pathogens, and high nutrients. And it's going to mix that with the blood that's coming from the hepatic artery proper, which I was trying to represent right there. It's mixing it with that blood. All of that blood is going slowly through those hepatic sinusoid capillaries. So the liver is going to take the oxygen because it needs it for cellular respiration, but it's also going to take the E. coli and pathogens and toxins out because that's the job of the liver. And it's going to slowly percolate blood up from the hepatic portal vein all the way until it gets into these two that are on the top of the liver. And these two dump into the inferior vena cava. These are the hepatic veins. You can't use hepatic portal vein and hepatic veins interchangeably. They have different kinds of blood in them. One of them would have a lot more toxins and pathogens than the other one would. So hepatic portal veins and hepatic veins. Let me see if I missed anything. Okay, sinusoid capillaries, right and left hepatic vein into the inferior vena cava. Okay, so we're going to go through this one more time. All right, so what I'm doing, and then I'll tell you what the spleen does too. So what I'm doing in this is I am gathering blood from the distal portion of the colon, the descending and sigmoid colon. So this is the inferior mesenteric vein. I'm gathering blood from almost the entire small intestine and the proximal portions of the colon, meaning ascending and transverse colon. This is drawn weird, but that's the ascending colon. It's flipped over. Ascending and transverse colon. So this is the superior mesenteric vein. I'm gathering blood from the spleen. Okay, so this is the splenic vein. All of those come together into the hepatic portal vein. The hepatic portal vein sends blood to the liver from the bottom to the top, slowly percolating it through the hepatic sinusoids, mixing it with the blood that came through the hepatic artery proper. And it slowly percolates. The liver takes the oxygen out so it can do its work. It takes the toxins and pathogens out, and then it delivers blood back into the hepatic veins. And the hepatic veins are here. They're on the top of the liver, and they dump into the inferior vena cava. Inferior vena cava goes back up to the right atrium of the heart. Okay, so what does the spleen have to do with this story? Well, most of you guys probably haven't learned very much about spleen function. I certainly never did until I probably, I don't know, embarrassingly late, maybe graduate school. So let me tell you what the spleen is doing. So all of these, 1, 2, are gathering blood that could potentially have pathogens and toxins in it. And the spleen is part of your immune system. The spleen has B cells and T cells, and it makes antibodies within it. So what it's really doing is these are bringing in the potentially invading troops, and this is sending in our forces. So E. coli, right? Toxins, and now antibodies and white blood cells, and all of those are going to gather here and go do battle in the liver itself. That's actually the battleground, okay? So the spleen is not sending blood to hepatic portal circulation because it's doing absorption of nasty stuff. It's because it actually has B cells, T cells, your lymphocytes, and antibodies, and also macrophages that are produced from the spleen, and they're going in to whoop up on all of the nasty stuff as it goes through. So let me show you an animation of the same thing. Okay, get all of those out of the way.
The hepatic portal system is a series of veins that transports blood from abdominal. The hepatic portal system is a series of veins that transports blood from abdominal organs directly to the liver. This gives the liver first access to substances absorbed from the digestive tract. These organs include the lower esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, spleen, pancreas, and gallbladder. The hepatic portal vein is the largest vessel of the hepatic portal system. It is formed by the union of the splenic and superior mesenteric veins. The splenic vein drains the spleen, pancreas, and portions of the large intestine. The superior mesenteric vein drains the majority of the small and portions of the large intestine. Blood from the lower esophagus, portions of the stomach, and the gallbladder drains directly into the hepatic portal vein. After entering the liver, the hepatic portal vein branches numerous times to end as channels called hepatic sinusoids. Liver cells lining the sinusoids detoxify metabolic waste, synthesize and secrete bile and plasma proteins, as well as synthesize and store glycogen. After filtering through the sinusoids, blood collects in central veins. Throughout the liver, thousands of central veins unite to form hepatic veins. The hepatic veins exit the liver and immediately join the inferior vena cava.
Okay, so that went into more detail than just the vessels that we learned, but it's still the same story. So hopefully that makes sense to you guys. Okay, so now all we have to do as far as the rest of systemic circulation is just the pelvis and lower limbs, because we have done everything else. Okay, so what we are going to do now, let's look back at this figure for just a second. Get systemic arterial blood supply to the pelvis and the lower limbs, and that's primarily going to happen as we get to the distal end of the descending abdominal aorta. We're going to split into the left and right common iliac arteries. There's going to be some smaller ones, but primarily the common iliac arteries are going to split into the external iliac arteries and the internal iliac arteries. Do you see those? External and internal iliac arteries. All right, so let's look at those in some more detail. This is a weird figure from your textbook, but we'll look at it anyway. So the internal iliac arteries, can you kind of tell what you're looking at here? Here's the common iliac that was splitting from the distal end of the descending abdominal aorta. The external iliac would be going mostly to the thigh and the leg, and then this guy right here is the internal iliac artery. So you're looking at the medial surface of the right os coxa, okay? I won't have you look like at details from this figure, but I just want to tell you what's supplied from there. So the internal iliac artery supplies the urinary bladder, the uterus, the vagina, the vas deferens. So really it supplies kind of your pelvic cavity and your junk. There's the internal iliac arteries. Note this guy right here, that's the umbilical ligament right there. That one's going to come into play in just a minute when I teach you guys about fetal circulation. So this guy right here, do you see all of these, the gluteals, the rectal, the pudendal, vaginal, uterine, all of those are coming from the internal iliac. You don't have to know the names of those, just sort of know that the internal iliac artery supplies these things. And then the external iliac artery is right here, but that's a weird figure of it, so let's look at it here. Okay, so this figure I actually like a bit better than the other one. So this is an anterior view. So when we look at this anterior view right here, here's the common iliac giving rise to the internal iliac right there. Okay, the internal iliac, which is giving rise to most of the blood supply to your pelvic cavity. And then this one's the external iliac right here. And the external iliac is relatively easy. The arteries are kind of named for the regions that they go through. So the external iliac gives rise to this one. This is called the femoral artery as it runs through the femur. They busted in. And then as it runs behind the knee right here, and you can see it here, that's the popliteal artery. And then it's going to split, and it's going to do posterior tibial as it runs behind the tibia. And then a branch is going to give rise to this guy right here, which is the anterior tibial artery. The posterior tibial artery also gives rise to this one that's more on the backside and lateral, and that's this guy right here called the fibular artery. So basically we are going to do common iliac gives rise to external iliac, which gives rise to femoral. Behind the knee it's popliteal. Behind the tibia it's posterior tibial. That gives rise to anterior tibial, right? And also fibular. So how do you tell the anterior tibial from the fibular? The anterior tibial will run, if you follow it, it's going to give rise to blood supply that goes to the superficial or dorsal surface of the foot, okay? And then the fibular is going to go lateral right here. You can see that. Okay. Although you don't have to know the names of the individual arches, the blood supply to the foot and the hand is similar. There are arches, and then there are digital arteries that come from those arches. Okay. Then let's do the venous drainage of the pelvis and lower limb. They don't talk a whole lot in your textbook, so I won't ask you very much about the venous drainage of the pelvis, but it's kind of similar to the arterial supply of the pelvis, and it's all mostly going to drain into the internal iliac vein. All right, but the leg, the thigh and leg have superficial and deep drainage, kind of like the arms did. So let's do the superficial drainage first. So same thing that we did with the arm. The superficial veins are generally going to be lighter in these diagrams, not actually in humans, but they're lighter in these diagrams. So what you are going to see with superficial drainage is kind of the same story. Digitals will drain into arches. This dorsal venous arch is all of those blood vessels that you can see on the dorsal surface of your foot. That's usually draining into the dorsal venous arch. And then I have this big long one right here called the great saphenous vein. That one goes all the way up the medial surface of the leg and the thigh, and usually dumps into the external iliac. Sometimes it can dump a little further up. And then as far as venous drainage, again, superficial venous drainage, this one's a little hard to find, but the only other one you need to know is this guy right here called the small saphenous vein, and that usually dumps either into the popliteal or sometimes it'll dump into the femoral. And that's really all you have to know about superficial drainage with those guys. With deep drainage, the deep drainage, you've got anterior tibial veins that run with the anterior tibial arteries, posterior tibial veins that run with the posterior tibial. Those will gather together into the popliteal. I'll show you in just a second. The popliteal will go up and drain into the femoral, and then the femoral will drain into the external iliac, so it's actually relatively easy. The only deal is that a lot of times you have, oh, did I not put the fibulars on there? Oh, fibular are also, you need them to know them for lab, so I'll show them to you too. Okay, so with these guys right here, when we're doing the deep drainage, here's your fibular veins, right? Following those up, this is a posterior view. Here's your fibular veins, right? Fibular veins usually dump into the into the popliteal. Here's these guys right here. These are the anterior tibial veins. Those usually dump into the popliteal. Here is the posterior tibial veins. Those usually become the popliteal. So you gather all three of those up, the fibular, which are lateral, the anterior tibial, and the posterior tibial. All of those dump into the popliteal. Popliteal becomes the femoral. Femoral will gather together with the internal iliac. Femoral will become the external iliac, then gather together with the internal iliac to become the common iliac. And the two common iliacs right there, when those join, the common iliacs will actually become the inferior vena cava. Okay, so the two common iliacs will become the inferior vena cava. Okay, so that is all of arterial and venous circulation, with the exception of the fact that I want to show you guys how fetal circulation works, because it's really cool. It's much cooler to do in person, but I gotta work with what I got here. Okay, so with fetal circulation, you're not tested over fetal circulation in lab, but it's super duper interesting. Fetal circulation is really interesting. So fetal circulation is different from adult circulation, primarily because there's no need for a separate systemic and pulmonary circuit in the fetus, because the lungs are not doing gas exchange with the external environment. All gas exchange is occurring via the mother's bloodstream to the fetal bloodstream. So, let's see, I can't remember if I have the animation of this. Okay, so I just have to explain this to you. All right, so first thing is to make sure some terminology. Make sure some terminology is clear. So first thing, I need you to know what a placenta is and what's the difference between a placenta and amniotic sac. Okay, so I got to give you some context for what you're looking at here. And I know some of you guys know this, but I know some of you don't. So if I'm over-explaining, I am definitely not trying to insult your intelligence. Okay, so what I want you to know is this little guy right here represents the the baby's belly button, okay? So I'm going to draw a really bad baby, right? Here's the head up there, arm, right? Some baby legs down here, right? The placenta is not okay. So there's my ugly baby, okay? So what is important for you to understand is that this guy right here is the umbilicus, or where the umbilical cord is connecting the mother to the fetus. And by the way, technically from a scientific perspective, it's a fetus until it's born, and then it's an infant, okay? So it's an embryo up until about 8 weeks post-implantation, and then it's a fetus. So what I want you to imagine is that all of this is inside the mother's uterus. So I'm going to draw a big old uterus, okay? And this guy right here is called the placenta. The placenta is this disc-shaped, really weird-looking structure that actually is attaching the fetal circulation to the maternal circulation. Okay, so maternal circulation is primarily through the internal iliac arteries, which give rise to the uterine arteries, which will give rise to the blood supply to the uterus. So all of the mother's blood, most of the mother's blood supply is coming via the uterine arteries. And she is delivering high oxygen, high nutrient blood to her uterus, okay? And the fetus is going to need a lot of that oxygen and nutrients. So how are you going to get that oxygen and nutrients to the fetus? Well, what happens is at the site of implantation, so fertilization happens in the fallopian tubes. Implantation happens in the wall of the uterus. At the site of implantation, give it a few weeks, and what's going to happen is the fetus is going to start to develop a really rich blood supply at that location, and the mom is going to develop more blood supply, and you're going to have this disc-shaped structure called the placenta that is stuck to the wall of the uterus. And the placenta is really made of maternal capillaries, really rich maternal capillaries, and fetal capillaries. And the fetal capillaries are all wound up with the maternal capillaries, but they're not connected to the maternal capillaries. And that's important because the fetus doesn't have necessarily the same blood type as the mother. So what I need is these two capillary beds to be snuggled up enough that I get good oxygen, nutrient, and waste exchange, but never actually connected to one another. So that's what the placenta is, and it looks like a disc shape. Okay, so what's going to happen is the mom is going to deliver high oxygen, high nutrient blood. The oxygen and nutrients are going to diffuse from the maternal capillaries into the fetal capillaries, and then they're going to be delivered to the fetus. And then the fetal heart is going to pump the oxygen and nutrients around, right, all over so that the fetus's organs can grow, right? And then once I'm finished, I'm going to have to deliver that carbon dioxide and waste products all the way back to the mother via the placenta. So I want you to look at the story. So basically, the placenta is connected to the fetus by what we call the umbilical cord. And the umbilical cord contains fetal blood vessels. And these fetal blood vessels are umbilical arteries, 2 of them, and an umbilical vein. What should happen is there shouldn't be any mixing of blood between the mom and the fetus, but there should be nutrients delivered, oxygen delivered to the fetus, waste carbon dioxide delivered back. So I'm going to tell you this whole story. Okay, I'm going to do it twice. Okay, so what's going to happen is the mom just delivered high levels of oxygen and nutrients. It is going to be delivered to the maternal capillary bed and the wall of the uterus, right? And then the oxygen and nutrients are going to move into the placenta. Okay, that's where the fetal capillary bed. So the placenta is really a hybrid structure that's part mom and part baby. So I want to follow oxygen because, of course, oxygen makes the blood change color, but realize that nutrients are moving with it. Okay, so what's going to happen is I am going to move blood from the placenta through this vessel right here, this one big vessel that's going to go in the belly button. So you see this one right here? It's going through the umbilical cord, but the red one that you were seeing right there, oops, not what I wanted. The red one that you are seeing right there is called the umbilical vein. Why is it a vein? It's a vein because it is going to deliver blood back to the fetal heart, okay? It's going to deliver high oxygen, high nutrient blood back into fetal circulation. So this umbilical vein is right here, number one. It's going to deliver blood back up. It's going to dump into the inferior vena cava just behind the liver. And then, of course, the inferior vena cava is going to dump into the right atrium. So when I get blood into the right atrium, it's going to do what you expect, right atrium to right ventricle out toward the lungs, right? But we don't need a separation of blood between the right and the left sides of the heart. So do you remember that there is a hole during fetal circulation that allows for exchange between the left and the right atria? That's this guy right here called the Foramen Ovale. When it's open, it's called the Foramen Ovale. When it closes, it's called the Fossa Ovalis. What that's going to do is to allow blood to go from the right side of the heart over to the left side of the heart. And then atria to ventricles, right? And ventricles contract and deliver blood into the aorta and into the pulmonary trunk. Again, I don't need different blood going to the lungs than I need going to the rest of the body. So I'm going to deliver blood into the pulmonary trunk, and it's going to deliver the same kind of blood to the lungs as to the rest of the body, but the lungs also don't need a disproportionate amount of blood. So I've got one more place where I can actually have exchange between the left and the right, or the typical pulmonary and systemic circulation. And that's this little guy right here. When it's open, it's called the Ductus Arteriosus, and it allows for exchange between the pulmonary trunk and the aortic arch, okay? When it closes later, it's just a ligament, and it's called the Ligamentum Arteriosum. So basically, in the heart and out of the heart, I have two exchanges, or two opportunities for mixing. I have the open Foramen Ovale, which allows for mixing between the right and the left atria. And then I have the Ductus Arteriosus, which allows for mixing between the pulmonary trunk and the aortic arch. Okay, so I'm going to deliver blood to the lungs, of course, and then I'm going to deliver blood to all of the typical systemic circulation. And the typical systemic circulation all comes from the aorta, of course, right? So I'm going to deliver blood all to the systemic organs, every place that you would imagine I was going to deliver blood, all going to go set up the same setup in fetal circulation. So the fetus is pumping blood through fetal circulation. The mom pumped blood to the placenta, right? The placenta takes blood back to the fetus, and then the fetus pumps blood through fetal circulation. But I also need to get blood back to the placenta because, of course, now I'm going through all of these capillary beds. I'm delivering oxygen. I'm picking up carbon dioxide. I'm picking up waste products. But I need to get all of this back to the fetus to get rid of it because the fetal digestive tract really isn't functioning yet. The fetal kidneys really aren't functioning yet. So really everything has to go back to the mom for you to get rid of it. How do I do that? Okay, I go down, of course, the aorta, right? Now I got to get blood back to the placenta. Where does the blood go back to the placenta? So down the aorta, common iliac arteries, then internal iliac arteries, and then there is a branch off of the internal iliac arteries in a fetus. That guy right there, this guy right here is going to give rise to the umbilical arteries. The umbilical arteries are going to go back out the belly button. They are going to deliver blood back, they are going to deliver blood back to the placenta. That blood is going to be high carbon dioxide, high waste. The carbon dioxide and waste that are delivered to the placenta are going to move from the fetal capillaries back into the maternal capillaries. And then the mom is going to deliver the carbon dioxide to her lungs, the waste products to her liver and to her kidneys, and then she's going to get rid of them for the fetus. Okay? All right, so let's do this one more time. Okay, All right, so start with the mom. Mom is going to deliver high oxygen, high nutrient blood to the wall of her uterus. In the wall of her uterus, it's going to go to the capillaries of the maternal capillaries of the placenta. Then what's going to happen is it's not connected to the fetal capillaries, but it's snuggled to the fetal capillaries. The oxygen and nutrients are going to move into the fetal capillaries. The oxygen and nutrients are going to move from the fetal capillaries into this big red vessel right here. That big red vessel is going to be called the umbilical vein. The umbilical vein is going to deliver blood back into the inferior vena cava, back to the right atrium. The right atrium and the left atrium are going to mix via the foramen ovale. They're going to mix blood. Then I do atrium to ventricles. Ventricles pump into the great arteries, which is the pulmonary trunk and the aorta. And then I'm going to mix blood again in the ductus arteriosus. I'm going to deliver blood to the arteries, deliver blood to systemic circulation. Systemic circulation is primarily going to go, of course, through the aorta. The aorta is going to deliver blood everywhere it generally does, and then it's also going to go back to the placenta via the common iliac arteries, and then the internal iliac arteries, and then the umbilical arteries. The umbilical arteries will go back out the umbilical cord, back out the umbilicus or the belly button, back to the placenta to deliver waste and carbon dioxide back to the placenta. Okay, so one little thing that I pointed out before is, remember this little guy right here? This is the remnant of an umbilical artery in the fetus that you can still find in an adult. So this little guy right here is the remnant of the umbilical arteries right there that came off of the internal iliacs. So it's kind of interesting. They're hard to find in a cadaver. Okay, so what happens at birth and when did these things actually close? So after birth, when the infant, when the fetus is delivered, becomes an infant, right? So through normal vaginal delivery, the fetus is going to come out, of course, the vagina. And then the fetus is going to be out of the body, but usually it's still going to be connected via the umbilical cord. Via the umbilical cord, it's still going to be connected. So you're going to have the fetus that's out of the body. The umbilical cord is still going to be attached to the fetal belly button umbilicus. It's going to go up through the vagina, and it's actually still going to attach to the placenta. So what do you need to do? So of course what they are going to do is they are going to cut the umbilical cord, assuming everything is healthy. They're going to cut the umbilical cord, and you are going to hope that the fetal lungs are functioning properly. The fetal lungs functioning properly is usually a good indicator of that, is that the fetus can actually make noise. So if the baby's crying or making noise, you can tell that the lungs are probably functioning properly. When the infant takes its first breath, generally speaking, the foramen ovale will slam shut, and it's going to start knitting together. It'll take a few days for it to knit together and become the fossa ovalis later. So foramen ovale closes to become the fossa ovalis. And then this guy right here, the ductus arteriosus, usually takes a couple of days to close. When that occurs, the O2 saturation in the infant will go up to 100%. That usually correlates with when the baby can go home, so that will close. When the ductus arteriosus closes, it becomes the ligamentum arteriosum. And then I won't hold you responsible for what these guys become, but let's talk about what happens to the placenta. So baby comes out, everything works really well. You cut the umbilical cord, the baby is breathing on his own, everything's great, okay? Now what do you have to do? Well, the placenta must be delivered as well, and often it's called the afterbirth, so you have to get it out of the uterus. A lot of times it will come out with a little uterine massage, sometimes even without it, but it must be delivered, and then you must inspect the placenta to make sure that there is no portion of the placenta that's left, because that tissue is now cut off from maternal circulation and fetal circulation, and the tissue will die and become necrotic, and it can kill the mother. So you have to, whether it's a human or a dog or a cow, you have to make sure that all of the portions of the placenta actually come out. So the placenta must be delivered as afterbirth. Okay. All right. So, and that is it for that set of notes.